Bill O'Reilly leaned forward, his voice edged with irritation and command. "Let me finish, Congresswoman," he barked, slicing through Jasmine Crockett's sentence for the 5th time in barely 8 minutes. The glare of the studio lights shimmered off his forehead as he raised his voice, intent on reclaiming dominance over the Fox Nation special, a program that was supposed to dissect new legislation but had devolved into yet another spectacle of O'Reilly's trademark interruptions. Viewers watched as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett remained perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture upright, her expression unshaken. Her composure stood in sharp contrast to O'Reilly's escalating volume. "With all due respect, Mr. O'Reilly," she began, her voice calm but firm, and once again he cut her off mid-sentence, waving his pen dismissively. "I asked the questions here." "That's how this works," he declared, his tone rising with self-assurance. "Now answer the question about your party's so-called economic plan, without the talking points." What happened next would silence one of television's most combative personalities, live on camera. Crockett's next words didn't just quiet O'Reilly, they froze him in place. Within 24 hours, the exchange had spread across social media like wildfire. Over 50 million views and countless headlines praising it as the moment Bill O'Reilly finally met his equal. It was hailed as a masterclass in poise and precision under pressure. Before revealing what Congresswoman Crockett said that left O'Reilly speechless and redefined the tone of modern political interviews, the segment's narrator teased, "Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more moments where real leaders stand tall under fire." Have you ever seen someone finally push back after being interrupted again and again? Tell us your story in the comments below. This wasn't some random viral outburst. It had been months in the making. Bill O'Reilly, once the undisputed titan of cable news before departing Fox amid controversy, had been carefully rebuilding his brand. Through Fox Nation specials and his own productions, he sought to remind audiences that his fiery edge hadn't dulled with age. At 73, his confrontational style remained unchanged, interrupting guests, dismissing complex answers, and ending unwelcome points with his infamous, "That's ridiculous." O'Reilly's entire approach is built on control, explained media analyst Jennifer Crawford. His formula is simple: interrupt, dominate, repeat, until the guest stumbles. It's not journalism, it's performance. That performance had worked flawlessly for decades, especially against guests who were unprepared for his relentless style. For this new special, O'Reilly's producers handpicked Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, assuming her lack of seniority would make her an easy target. Bill thought she'd be a quick takedown, a production assistant later revealed anonymously. He told the crew these new politicians always freeze. They're used to soft interviews and podcast fluff, but O'Reilly's team had overlooked one crucial detail: Jasmine Crockett's legal roots. Before her career in politics, she had spent over 15 years as a defense attorney in Texas, handling high-stakes criminal and civil rights cases before some of the toughest judges in the country. "People underestimate her because they don't know her background," said Marcus Washington, a longtime colleague. "She's faced prosecutors trying to break her composure every single day. She's been interrupted before, but in her world the stakes weren't ratings. They were freedom and justice. Raised in St. Louis by hardworking, blue-collar parents, Crockett had climbed her way through college and law school, carving out a name as a fierce, unflappable trial lawyer. Her reputation was built on grace under pressure and a refusal to be rattled. Moving into politics felt like a natural evolution after years of challenging bias in the Texas courts and winning landmark cases that confronted systemic power. Since joining Congress, she'd largely avoided the media spotlight, preferring to focus on policy rather than sound bites. So when O'Reilly's producers reached out to discuss her new economic development bill, her team hesitated. "We knew exactly who he was," admitted her communications director, Alicia Thomas. But the Congresswoman saw it as a chance to reach people who might never otherwise hear her message. Crockett's response had been simple. "I've handled tougher cross-examinations than Bill." O'Reilly, the interview was booked for. O'Reilly's primetime slot, hyped as an unfiltered conversation with one of the rising stars of progressive politics. But behind the camera, producers were plotting a very different kind of exchange, one designed to provoke, not to inform. The instructions were clear, said one insider. Keep her defensive. Cut her off before she gets too detailed. We wanted emotional clips, not policy talk. Just minutes before the broadcast, O'Reilly reviewed his notes with smug confidence. This'll be quick, he told his team. These new politicians never know what's coming. But this time, he was wrong. Congresswoman Crockett had spent the night before watching hours of O'Reilly's old interviews, mapping his patterns when he'd raise his voice, when he'd interject, and how he baited his guests into emotional outbursts. She had crafted crisp, deliberate answers, each one concise enough to resist interruption, yet substantive enough to expose his tactics. As the studio countdown began and the bright lights flared, O'Reilly greeted her with a cold handshake and avoided eye contact. There was no warmth, no pre-show banter. He saw her not as a guest, but as an opponent. Both entered ready for battle, but only one understood the game. The opening minutes appeared civil. O'Reilly introduced her with minimal enthusiasm, describing her as a freshman Democrat from Texas with a law background. Then came the first question. Your economic development bill calls for major investments in underserved communities, he began. How do you justify more government spending when inflation is already hurting families? Crockett smiled gently, keeping her tone measured. Thank you for having me, Bill. This legislation actually addresses inflation but it's still government spending, isn't it? O'Reilly cut in before she could finish. He leaned forward, voice sharpening. That's taxpayer money. Fact. It was a classic O'Reilly ambush, the kind meant to knock guests off balance. But Crockett didn't so much as blink. She paused, smiled faintly, and said evenly, If I may finish, the bill is fully funded by closing corporate tax loopholes. Same old excuse, O'Reilly shot back, waving his pen. Let's be real, this is just wealth redistribution in disguise, right? The interruptions came faster, louder, more insistent. Each time Crockett began to explain the bill's substance, O'Reilly bulldozed over her words, turning the conversation into a one-man monologue. Our viewers don't care about technicalities, he sneered. They want to know why Democrats think spending is the answer to everything. His voice rose with every sentence, his pen stabbing the air like a gavel. But Crockett stayed perfectly calm, her tone steady, her body language composed. She countered every interruption with facts and focus. Never frustration. The camera crew exchanged uneasy looks. They'd never seen anyone remain so composed under O'Reilly's verbal blitz. Then came the fifth interruption, the one that broke the pattern. As Crockett referenced data from independent studies, O'Reilly snapped, Let me finish, Congresswoman. That's how this works. I ask questions, you give straight answers, and no political spin. Now, answer the question about your party's so-called economic plan. The studio fell silent. Even the background hum of equipment seemed to fade. Crockett inhaled quietly, then looked directly at him. Mr. O'Reilly, she said, her tone controlled but firm. You've interrupted me 5 times in less than 8 minutes. I've answered every question with respect and substance. If you'd like a real conversation, I'm happy to continue. But if this is just about generating conflict for ratings, we can end this here, and I'll gladly speak with journalists who care about facts. The room froze. For the first time in years, Bill O'Reilly had no comeback. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his confidence faltering. I'm giving you tough questions. That's my job, he muttered defensively. I welcome tough questions, Crockett interjected smoothly. What I don't welcome is being invited to answer them and then not being allowed to speak. There's a difference between real journalism and performative interruption. Camera operators would later recall that O'Reilly's face tightened, his signature control slipping away. He tried to pivot. Let's move on. Crime in major cities. Your party? I'd be glad to discuss that, Crockett replied instantly. But let's make sure we're having an actual discussion. Will you allow me to finish my answers this time, Mr. O'Reilly? Or should your viewers expect more interruptions? The question wasn't angry. It was surgical, and it froze the studio once again. Producers in the control room watched O'Reilly's expression change, the dawning realization that his usual strategy wasn't working. "I let all my guests answer," he insisted, though his 5 interruptions told another story. "But I don't allow filibustering." "Substantive answers take context," Crockett replied evenly. "If every thoughtful explanation is labeled a filibuster and only quick sound bites are rewarded, you're not informing your audience. You're misleading them." The words landed like a hammer. O'Reilly's jaw tightened. His pen hovered motionless. Trying to recover, he leaned in, voice lower but laced with condescension. "All right, Congresswoman. Let's try this again. In simple terms, without the spin, why isn't your economic plan just another tax and spend liberal policy that's already failed a dozen times before?" The tone was mocking. The intent was clear. He wanted to bait her into anger. But Jasmine Crockett didn't bite. She straightened her posture, smiled faintly, and prepared to deliver the line that would make television history, but Crockett didn't take the bait. The crew held their breath, sensing a major moment approaching. Viewers would later debate this scene endlessly online, analyzing how one exchange completely reversed decades of O'Reilly interview dominance instead of snapping back. Congresswoman Crockett smiled, a small, confident smile that instantly changed the room's energy. "Mr. O'Reilly," she began, "I'm going to answer your question thoroughly, and I'd appreciate the professional courtesy of not being interrupted again." Her voice carried quiet authority. "Before I came to Congress, I spent 15 years in courtrooms. Interrupting an attorney or witness would earn an objection or even sanctions from a judge. In professional debate, you let people complete their thoughts. That's how real dialogue works." She paused, locking eyes with O'Reilly, who seemed momentarily caught off guard. Then she continued, "Now about your question. The legislation I've proposed isn't a traditional government spending plan. It's a public-private partnership model. That means limited federal seed funding used to attract much larger private investments. For every federal dollar, we've seen 9 of private capital flow into local economies." Her explanation was clear, data-driven, and impossible to dismiss. In communities where similar models were piloted, she added, median household income rose by 23% over 5 years. Small business creation doubled. Property values stabilized, and long-term residents weren't displaced as O'Reilly opened his mouth to interrupt again. Crockett subtly raised her hand, a calm but unmistakable signal to let her finish. "The approach is based on models developed by Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz," she continued. "And it's already received bipartisan support in multiple state legislatures. In fact, Republican Governor Phil Scott of Vermont publicly praised its fiscal responsibility and return on investment. Then came the line that instantly went viral. So to directly answer your question, this isn't a tax and spend liberal policy," Crockett said steadily. "It's an evidence-based growth strategy supported by economists from Milton Friedman to Friedrich Hayek. It strengthens market efficiency, demands measurable outcomes, and ends automatically if benchmarks aren't met. I welcome tough questions about this approach, but those questions should reflect the actual policy, not partisan talking points." The studio went silent. For a man who built his brand on controlling every conversation, Bill O'Reilly suddenly had nothing to say. The cameras caught him shuffling his papers, searching for words. His famous confidence faltered. Viewers later described the silence as the moment Thalion blinked. After several awkward seconds, O'Reilly tried to recover. "Well, that sounds good in theory," he began, but Crockett didn't miss a beat. "It's not theory," she interjected smoothly, using his own interruption tactic against him. "We have 5 years of data from programs in Texas, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, all showing these same results. I can send your producers the full reports from the Brookings Institution and the American Enterprise Institute. They both confirm the model's effectiveness. By now, the power dynamic had completely flipped. O'Reilly, Thiemann known for dominating every exchange, was on the defensive. "Our viewers don't need an economics lecture," he muttered, attempting to regain control. Crockett smiled again. "Your viewers deserve accurate information about policies that shape their communities," she replied. "If presenting facts feels like a lecture, maybe that says more about the depth of discussion on this program than it does about my answers." The room fell silent again. The producers, the crew, even O'Reilly himself, all knew they had just witnessed something historic. Within hours, that clip would explode across social media with headlines like Crockett silences, O'Reilly live on air, and the interview that changed cable news. This powerful response delivered calmly yet with sharp precision completely threw O'Reilly off balance. The man, known for his dominance and quick retorts, suddenly seemed unsure of what to say. In the control room, producers watched in disbelief as the famously confident host struggled to regain his footing. One of them quickly whispered through his earpiece, "We should cut to a break," trying to save him from the growing tension on air. "We'll take a quick break and come back with Congresswoman Crockett." Riley announced, his relief almost visible. As the camera stopped rolling, he took off his mic and immediately called over his executive producer. Crew members overheard him saying, "Why wasn't I properly briefed about her background? She's clearly not your average congressional guest." Meanwhile, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat calmly at her desk, reviewing her notes as if nothing unusual had happened. Unlike many guests who left O'Reilly's seat rattled, she showed complete confidence. No stress, no frustration, just focus. When the show returned from the break, viewers immediately sensed a change in O'Reilly's attitude. The interruption stopped. His tone softened. For once, he allowed his guests to finish her sentences. The transformation was so noticeable that one production assistant later said, "I've never seen anything like that." O'Reilly actually changed his entire interview style in the middle of the segment. He started listening. That never happens. By the end of their exchange, what had started as a heated confrontation had turned into something rare for O'Reilly's show. A genuine in-depth policy discussion. The audience could see that the power dynamic had completely flipped. As the segment wrapped up, O'Reilly reached out his hand and said respectfully, "Congresswoman Crockett, thank you for your time. You clearly came prepared. It was the closest thing to an on-air concession viewers had ever seen from him. Have you ever seen someone completely change their tone mid-conversation when they realized their usual tactics weren't working? Tell us what happened in the comments." The impact of Crockett's interview spread like wildfire. Within hours, clips of her calmly commanding the discussion after O'Reilly's fifth interruption went viral. The hashtag "Let Her Finish" started trending across social media. News outlets from both sides of the aisle replayed the exchange, calling a tone of the most powerful moments on cable news that year. Media analyst Carlos Mendez said on CNN, "What made Congresswoman Crockett so effective wasn't that she fought back in anger. It was that she refused to play his game. She changed the tone of the interview completely, and O'Reilly had to follow her lead." Even conservative commentator Brittany Hughes, while disagreeing with Crockett's politics, admitted that her performance was masterful. Whether or not you share her views, Hughes said Crockett gave a lesson in how to handle aggressive interviewers. She stayed calm, precise, and professional, and that's what made her stand out. Within just 24 hours, the clip hit over 50 million views, shared by journalists, professors, and public figures across the country. Former White House Communications Director Jennifer Palmieri tweeted, "Every public speaker should study this moment. Crockett showed you can be assertive without being hostile, confident without being defensive." For O'Reilly, however, it was a rare setback. A man known for always being in control suddenly became the subject of endless memes and highlight videos, comparing his usual dominating style to his uncomfortable silence that day asterisk. Days later, O'Reilly addressed the viral clip on his podcast. "I asked tough questions and she gave detailed answers. That's how good interviews work," I insisted. "People saying I was stunned air wrong. I was listening as any professional host should, but viewers weren't buying it." The footage told a different story, one where O'Reilly's interruptions, irritation, and eventual silence were clearly visible. Media critics called out the irony. A host famous for talking over guests now claiming he was just listening. For Congresswoman Crockett, though, the interview became a defining career moment. She received invitations from morning shows and news programs nationwide, but instead of feeding the viral drama, she redirected the attention back to policy. On MSNBC's Morning Joe, she explained, "I didn't goon that show to create a viral clip. I went to talk about real economic solutions for working families. The fact that being calm and factual made headlines says more about our media culture than about me. Her words resonated deeply, reminding everyone that true leadership isn't about volume or theatrics. It's about clarity, composure, and substance. This powerful exchange further strengthened Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's reputation as a leader who values real discussion over performance. After the viral O'Reilly interview, her image in Washington changed dramatically. Colleagues on both sides of the aisle began to see her not as a newcomer learning the ropes, but as a serious and prepared lawmaker. Political reporter Sandra Mitchell explained, "Before that moment, many thought she was just another freshman representative. Afterward, even senior members treated her with new respect. Committee hearings noticeably shifted whenever Crockett was present. Lawmakers who might have dismissed her before now listened more carefully, aware that she was not someone who could be interrupted or talked over easily. Perhaps the most surprising impact came from congressional communications teams across Washington. Dozens of offices began requesting one thing from their media trainers: get me the Crockett training workshops on how to stay composed under pressure and maintain message control during tough interviews. Suddenly saw record demand from both. Democrats and Republicans, even journalism schools, began teaching the O'Reilly-Crockett exchange as a case study. Professors showed students how her calm, structured responses turned an aggressive interview into a lesson in professionalism. Columbia Journalism School professor Richard Torres told his class, "Watch how Congresswoman Crockett directly addresses the real issue, the constant interruptions, and then guides the discussion back to substance. That's how you reestablish respect without losing composure." 6 months later, her influence was still being felt throughout political media. Guests across TV networks began adopting what analysts started calling the Crockett approach. Interviewees were now openly calling out interruptions, while hosts became noticeably more cautious about cutting guests off, especially female politicians who historically faced more interruptions than men. Media research group Mediascope even published data confirming what many had observed. "We're seeing what we call the Crockett effect," their report said. Guest interruptions across political talk shows dropped by nearly 23% over the past year, with the biggest changes happening in interviews with women leaders. For O'Reilly himself, the incident became a turning point. About 6 weeks after that unforgettable interview, he invited Crockett back on his show. But this time, things were different. Viewers noticed a calmer tone and a far more respectful style. O'Reilly opened the segment by saying, "I think we had a constructive conversation last time, and I'd like to continue exploring your economic ideas in more detail." It was an astonishing shift, proof that even a seasoned host known for his tough, interruptive style could evolve when challenged with professionalism and poise for audiences used to political interviews filled with shouting and talking points. The Crocodile Exchange offered something refreshing, real, thoughtful dialogue. Veteran political journalist Robert McKenzie summarized it perfectly. "What makes this moment historic isn't just that Congresswoman Crockett held her ground. It's that she raised the level of conversation while doing it. She didn't just win the argument. She changed how political interviews could work." A full year after the viral exchange, the impact was still visible. Media trainers, communications directors, and journalism professors continued referencing it as a turning point. The day a freshman congresswoman with a trial lawyer's confidence changed one of the most combative TV formats in history. Media analyst Jennifer Crawford later reflected, "In an era where politics often looks more like a shouting match than a debate, Jasmine Crockett proved that preparation, calmness, and focus are more powerful than volume or aggression." That lesson reshaped how political figures prepared for interviews, and perhaps even more importantly, how viewers expected journalists to behave. The takeaway for public officials was crystal clear. Real expertise, steady confidence, and a refusal to be baited air far stronger than emotional outbursts or defensive reactions. By calmly rewriting the rules of engagement, Crockett didn't just win one viral moment, she set a new standard for political communication that continues to inspire interviews. Today, if you found this deep dive into how composure and preparation can transform even the most hostile interviews valuable, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more breakdowns of iconic political moments. the fight for better. More meaningful political discussions is still ongoing, and informed viewers like you play a huge role in pushing for that change. Which political interviews have changed the way you view the media? And what lessons from Congresswoman Crockett's strategy do you think other leaders should learn? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.